Once again, this is Francis Mbolwa, your science zealot. We are looking at dissection of the toad and frog. In this lesson, we are going to look at identification, habitat and adaptation to survive in the habitat, sex identification, and classification. So, I hope you enjoy this lesson. Before we proceed, we are going to look at anatomical terms used to describe position. There are several of these, and those that are of practical importance include the following. Anterior. Anterior is used to refer to placement that is towards the front of the animal. Posterior is used to describe position towards the hind of the animal. Dorsal is used to describe position on the upper surface of the animal. Ventral is used to refer to position on the lower surface of the animal. Lateral is used to refer to a position that is far from the midline, that is towards the side of the animal. Medial is used to refer to a position that is close to the midline. For structures that are attached to the animal, such as the limbs, there are two terms that we usually use to refer to position. We say proximal if we are referring to a point that is close to the point of attachment of the limb onto the trunk, while distal is used to describe a position of a structure that is far away from the point of attachment of the appendage or limb to the trunk. Therefore, if the examiner says, make a drawing of the distal segment of the hind limb, this is what they mean. If they said, make a drawing of the proximal segment, this is what they mean. These terms, you should be aware of them because they are terms that examiners will always use when they are giving you instructions to make your dissections. Thank you. Identification. In identification of specimen provided for dissection, we normally use the class names to identify the specimen. But the toad and frog are an exception. It is only here that we are allowed to use the specimen common names to identify them. Therefore, as a student, you must take keen interest in noting the difference between a frog and a toad. Because if they provide them to you for an exam and they say identify the specimen, you are not going to say it is an amphibian. You have to identify the frog as a frog and identify a toad as a toad. So here we are going to look at the structural differences that distinguish a toad from a frog. And these are the features that you are supposed to give when you are identifying the specimen in an exam, either as a toad or as a frog. As you look at the two images, you realize that the skin of a frog is thin, while when you look at the skin of a toad, it is thick. The skin surface of a frog is smooth, shiny, slimy, and moist, whereas when we look at the skin of a toad, the surface is rough, warty, but is also slimy and moist. If we examine the hind limbs of the two specimens, we're going to realize that the frog usually has very long, thick, muscular, and flexible hind limbs, which are usually highly folded onto the body. Whereas, when we look at the hind limbs of the toad, we realize that they are shorter compared to those of the frog, but also muscular, flexible, and highly folded onto the body. The hind limbs of the frog usually have a more elaborate web between the toes, while the waves between the toes of the hind limbs of the toad are usually highly reduced. This is an indication that a toad is more adapted to land environment than water environment as compared to the frog. Those are the main differences that we can see clearly between the two specimens.